The cold wind carried the sound of metal wheels grinding against the tracks, echoing across the small town of Fairbrook, Illinois. It was just past dawn in February of 1987, the kind of morning when frost clung to every branch, and even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. Sarah Collins, a 32-year-old nurse on her way home from a night shift, tightened her scarf as she crossed the old railway bridge. She had taken that route every morning for years, but on that particular day, something made her stop. It wasn't the silence. It was a faint, trembling sound. A cry. She froze, listening. There it was again. Soft, broken sobs carried by the wind. Following the sound, Sarah stepped carefully along the gravel beside the tracks until her flashlight revealed something that stopped her heart. Wrapped in a thin blue blanket, half covered in frost, lay a baby boy. "Oh my God," she whispered, kneeling down. The child was trembling but alive, his cheeks red from the cold, his tiny fists clinging to the fabric as if holding on to life itself. Sarah scooped him up, pressing him against her chest to share her warmth. "You're safe now," she murmured. "You're going to be just fine." At the local hospital, news of the mysterious baby spread quickly. No one had reported a missing child. No one claimed him, and the police found no clues. Just the faded blanket with an odd, stitched emblem on one corner, a small golden circle intertwined with a pair of wings. For weeks, the town buzzed with speculation. Who would abandon a baby near the railroad? Where were his parents? The newspapers called him the baby from the tracks. But as the weeks turned to months, the story faded from the headlines. Except for one couple, Mark and Linda Thompson. Mark, a mechanic, and Linda, a schoolteacher, had been trying to have children for nearly a decade. When they saw the baby in the hospital nursery, Linda felt something inside her shift. "That's him," she whispered to her husband. "That's our son." After months of paperwork and waiting, the adoption was finalized. They named him Mike, short, simple, strong. From the beginning, Mike was a bright and curious child. He loved toy trains, always fascinated by their rhythm and sound. Linda used to laugh and say it was destiny, that the tracks that had once nearly taken his life had instead led him to theirs. But sometimes, when Mike was asleep, Mark and Linda would hear him cry softly, murmuring words no one understood. And sometimes, when the whistle of a distant train echoed through the night, he would wake up suddenly, eyes wide open, as if remembering something that shouldn't be possible. Years passed. Mike grew into a cheerful, kind-hearted boy. He loved his parents deeply and never doubted their love for him. Yet somewhere deep inside, a quiet question lingered, one he didn't know how to ask. Who was he before the Thompsons found him? It was a thought he buried under laughter, school days, and dreams of the future. But destiny has a strange way of waiting. And for Mike, the truth, the one buried for 35 years, was already beginning to stir. Because far from Fairbrook, in a dusty attic of an old photography shop, a forgotten wedding photo was waiting. And in that photo, hidden in the background, was something no one had ever noticed before. The same golden emblem stitched on his baby blanket. But that discovery would come much later. For now, Mike was still just a boy rescued by chance, unaware that every train passing through his town carried echoes of a past that was about to find him again. If you found this story moving so far, don't forget to subscribe and stay until the end. What Mike discovers will leave you speechless. Years slipped by like pages turning in a forgotten book. By the time Mike turned 12, Fairbrook had changed. The small-town diner where his parents used to meet for breakfast had closed, and most of the factories were gone. But the old railway still cut through the heart of town like a scar that refused to fade. Mike had grown into a boy with curious eyes and an instinctive kindness that made people feel at ease. He was the kind of kid who helped his neighbors carry groceries and fixed his friends' bikes without being asked. Yet when he was alone, he often found himself walking near the railroad tracks, staring at the rails that shimmered like mirrors under the afternoon sun. Linda once caught him there and gently asked, "What do you keep looking for, sweetheart?" Mike shrugged. "I don't know. It just feels like I've been here before." Linda's heart ached. She smiled and ruffled his hair. "Maybe it's because this is where your story began." He nodded, but the question didn't leave him. When Mike was 16, he had a strange dream that woke him in the middle of the night. In the dream, he was lying in the snow, the sound of a train in the distance, and two figures, blurred and desperate, were shouting his name. He could almost hear them, almost see their faces before the whistle drowned everything out. The next morning, he sat quietly at breakfast, staring at the steam rising from his coffee mug. Mark noticed. "You okay, son?" "Yeah," Mike said softly. "Just weird dreams." Mark smiled. "Dreams don't mean much. What matters is what you do when you're awake." But Mike wasn't so sure. Somewhere in those dreams, in those sounds and flashes of memory, something was trying to speak to him. By the time he finished college, Mike had built a good life. He worked in construction management, enjoyed quiet weekends fishing with his dad, and had fallen in love with Emily Carter, a smart, kind-hearted woman who taught art at the local elementary school. She loved how grounded Mike was, how gentle his soul felt despite the uncertainty of his beginnings. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped low, Emily asked him a question she had never dared before. "Do you ever want to find out where you came from?" Mike hesitated. "Sometimes, but Mom and Dad are my family. That's all I need." Emily nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "Still, it might be nice to know." Mike smiled faintly. Maybe one day. That one day came faster than either of them expected. 2 months before their wedding, Emily was helping a friend decorate a vintage-themed cafe that had just opened downtown. The owner had filled the walls with old photos, black and white portraits, wedding pictures, and community events from decades ago. While cleaning one of the frames, Emily froze. The photo showed a wedding from the late 1980s, the bride and groom smiling in front of a rustic barn. But behind them on a small table was a folded blue baby blanket, with a golden circle and 2 stitched wings. Her chest tightened. She took a photo of it with her phone and waited until Mike came to pick her up. When she showed him, Mike's face went pale. "Where did you find this?" "In the cafe," she whispered. "Why?" He reached out and touched the screen, his hand trembling. That's the same symbol. The one on my blanket." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Mike swallowed hard. "It's the only thing they found with me when I was a baby." The cafe around them blurred as his mind spun. How could that symbol, something that had haunted the edges of his past, appear in a random photograph from decades ago? It was no coincidence. He knew it instantly. Something deep inside him stirred, something that had been silent for 35 years. The truth had just called his name again, and this time Mike was ready to follow it. That night, Mike couldn't sleep. He sat in his living room with the lights off, the glow of Emily's phone illuminating the wedding photo again and again. Every time he looked at that tiny emblem, the golden circle with the wings, a wave of memories he didn't know he had seemed to tremble beneath the surface. He opened his laptop and began searching. Golden circle with wings, vintage emblem, family crest, Fairbrook weddings 1980s. Nothing. Dozens of pages, hundreds of images. None matched the symbol. Emily joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "Maybe it's a coincidence," she whispered. He shook his head. "No. There's something about it. It's not just decoration, it means something." The next morning, Mike went back to the cafe. The owner, a gray-haired man named Mr. Jensen, was polishing cups behind the counter. "That photo on the wall," Mike said, pointing toward the picture. "Do you know where it came from?" Mr. Jensen shrugged. "Bought it from a guy who cleared out an old photography studio over in Rockdale. Place belonged to a man named Henry Carter. Been closed since the 90s. Mike's pulse quickened. "Henry Carter? Any idea what happened to him?" "Passed away years ago, I think," Jensen said. "But his daughter still lives in Rockdale. Keeps most of his negatives and archives, I've heard." By that afternoon, Mike and Emily were driving down a narrow country road lined with autumn trees, leaves swirling like embers in the wind. Rockdale was quiet, the kind of town where time moved slower, where every porch had a story to tell. They found the Carter house at the edge of town, an old white farmhouse surrounded by wildflowers and rusted photo equipment. A woman in her 60s opened the door, her gentle face framed by gray curls. "Can I help you?" she asked. "My name's Mike Thompson. he said, holding up his phone. "I think one of your father's photos might be connected to me." She frowned slightly, adjusting her glasses. "Come in, dear." Inside, the walls were covered with her father's work. Portraits of soldiers, newlyweds, and families from decades past. Mike explained everything, how he'd been found near the railroad as a baby, the blanket with the golden emblem, and the photo that had resurfaced. When she saw the picture, her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my, I remember this wedding," she said softly. "That was the Miller wedding. 1987, if I'm not mistaken." Mike's heart pounded. "Do you remember anything else about them?" "Well," she said slowly, "they weren't from Rockdale. They came from a nearby town, Belridge maybe. Lovely couple. I remember because they asked my father to photograph a pendant the bride wore. It had the same symbol, that golden circle with wings." Mike felt his hands go cold. "A pendant?" She nodded. "Yes, her name was Laura Miller. And there was talk that the emblem came from her family's company, a small freight business that shut down after a terrible accident." "What kind of accident?" Emily asked quietly. Mrs. Carter's eyes softened. "A train derailment, back in 1987. They said the Millers lost a child that night." Mike's breath caught. A child?" She nodded sadly. "Yes, a baby boy. They searched for weeks but never found him." Silence filled the room, heavy and electric. Emily reached for Mike's hand, but he couldn't move. His entire body trembled as if the ground beneath him had just shifted. "That was the same year," he whispered. "The same year I was found by the tracks." Mrs. Carter looked at him with wide eyes. "Oh, dear God." Mike stood there staring at the photo on the wall. The smiling couple. The tiny emblem. The faint trace of something unspeakably familiar in the bride's face. It couldn't be coincidence anymore. The photo that Emily found wasn't just decoration. It was the first piece of the puzzle, and the doorway to a truth buried for 35 years. Mike drove home in silence, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The late afternoon sun streaked through the windshield, painting everything gold. But inside he felt nothing but the chill of disbelief. A train derailment, a missing baby, the same symbol, the same year. Emily sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "If this is true," she whispered, "then that means I wasn't abandoned," he said quietly. "I was lost." That night, Mike couldn't stop thinking about Laura and Daniel Miller, the couple in the photo. He searched old newspapers, public records, and archived obituaries until his eyes burned. Finally, he found it. Train tragedy near Belridge. Infant missing after collision. The headline was from the Belridge Chronicle, February 8, 1987. He read every word. A freight train had derailed after hitting a truck stalled on the tracks. Several families were aboard the passenger car nearest the impact. Among the survivors were Laura and Daniel Miller, who had escaped with minor injuries, but their 1-year-old son, Michael Miller, was never found. The article said the couple searched for weeks. Police scoured the area, but with the chaos and flooding that followed, hope eventually faded. The Millers moved away soon after, their freight business ruined by the accident. Mike leaned back in his chair, his heart hammering. The dates matched exactly. The location was only 30 miles from Fairbrook, the same stretch of track where he'd been found. He wasn't a mystery child. He was the missing child. He and Emily decided to visit Belridge that weekend. The town was small and quiet, its main street lined with antique stores and faded billboards. The local library was nearly empty, and the woman at the front desk helped them find the Miller family file. According to the records, Daniel Miller had passed away in 1998. Laura had remarried years later and moved to the coast, to a town called Clearwater. Mike stared at the name, unable to breathe for a moment. Emily touched his shoulder. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready." He looked at her with wet eyes. "I've waited my whole life without knowing where I came from. I can't stop now." 2 days later, they drove to Clearwater, a peaceful seaside town with white cottages and gulls circling over the water. They found the address listed in the records, a small house with rose bushes in front and the sound of waves in the distance. Mike stood frozen on the porch, his heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. "What if she doesn't believe me?" he asked quietly. Emily squeezed his hand. "Then we'll show her the truth." He took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened slowly and an elderly woman appeared. Silver hair pulled into a bun, soft blue eyes behind thin glasses. She looked tired, but graceful, the kind of face that had known both love and loss. "Yes?" she asked gently. Mike tried to speak, but his voice caught. "Are you Laura Miller?" She hesitated. "I was, a long time ago." He swallowed hard. "My name is Mike Thompson. I think I might be your son." Her expression froze, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something deeper. "My son?" she whispered. He nodded, hands trembling as he took the photo from his jacket pocket, the wedding picture with the golden emblem. This was yours, wasn't it?" She took the photo, her hands shaking. Her eyes darted from the picture to his face, studying the shape of his jaw, the curve of his eyes. And then, suddenly, she stepped back, her lips quivering. "It can't be," she breathed. "You were gone. You were gone forever." Tears filled Mike's eyes. "I think I was found near the railroad that same night. I don't remember anything. But the blanket, the symbol, everything matches." Laura pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. A sob broke from her chest, the kind that comes from 35 years of buried pain. She reached out and pulled him into her arms, holding him as if to make up for every lost day, every unanswered prayer. "Oh, my baby," she cried. "My beautiful boy. They told me you were gone." Mike's voice cracked. "I never stopped wondering who I was. Now I finally know." They stood there in the doorway, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and roses, both of them trembling with the weight of what they had lost, and finally found again. The sun was setting over Clearwater when Mike finally sat with Laura in her small living room. Old photographs covered the walls, black and white portraits, family vacations, even a picture of a baby with a faint dimple on his left cheek. Mike had the same dimple. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred, the kind that fills the air when time tries to heal what it once stole. Laura's voice trembled as she began. "It was a stormy night. We were coming home from visiting your grandparents. You were barely a year old. The train stopped suddenly. Metal screamed, people fell, the lights went out. When I woke up, everything was smoke and chaos. Your father, he ran to find you, but there was a fire. Someone shouted that a rescue team had taken the children. We believed you'd been carried away." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "We searched for weeks, Mike. We begged the police. We put out notices. We prayed every night. Then, when the floods came, they told us the bodies could have been washed away. They said there was no hope." Mike took her hand, his eyes burning. "But I was there, just a few miles down the track. A woman found me that morning. She saved me." Laura closed her eyes, her body shaking. "All those years, I thought you were gone. If I had known," he squeezed her hand, "you couldn't have known. None of this was your fault." They sat like that, mother and son, two strangers bound by blood and years of longing. Over the next few days, Mike and Laura spent every moment together. She showed him photo albums, family letters, and the last pendant she kept, the golden circle with wings that matched his baby blanket. "It was your father's company logo," she explained softly. "He used to say it meant hope that flies. He wanted it to remind us that no matter what happens, hope always finds a way back." Mike smiled faintly. "I guess it did." They laughed through tears, catching up on decades that could never truly be recovered, but could finally be honored. Emily joined them later, watching with quiet joy as Laura held her son's hand, as if afraid he might disappear again. A few weeks later, the wedding took place in Fairbrook, in the same little church where Mike had been baptized by his adoptive parents. Linda and Mark sat in the front pew, proud and tearful. They had raised him, loved him, given him a life when fate had taken everything away. And now, on this day, Laura sat beside them, her hands clasped tightly around Linda's. Two mothers bound by love for the same man, both knowing that their hearts had been part of the same miracle. As Mike and Emily exchanged vows, sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting them in soft shades of gold and blue, the same colors as that baby blanket so many years ago. After the ceremony, Laura handed Mike a small wrapped box. Inside was the pendant, the golden circle with wings. "It's yours," she said softly. "It's always been yours." Mike placed it around his neck and looked at both his mothers. "I used to think I was abandoned," he said quietly. "But I wasn't. I was found, again and again, by love." Tears shimmered in everyone's eyes as he hugged them both. The sound of a train whistle echoed faintly in the distance, carried by the wind. Not a haunting sound anymore, but a song of homecoming. Months later, a framed photo hung in Mike and Emily's new home. It wasn't the mysterious wedding photo that started it all, but a new one. Their own wedding picture, taken on that bright morning in Fairbrook. And behind them, almost hidden in the background, the pendant caught the sunlight just enough to form a glint of gold with two tiny wings. Emily once asked him, "Do you ever think about how everything had to happen exactly as it did, for us to meet?" Mike smiled. Every day. He looked out the window toward the horizon where faint railroad tracks shimmered in the distance. "Some stories," he said, "don't begin where you're born. They begin the moment someone finds you. Sometimes the past isn't lost. It's waiting patiently for the right moment to be found. And when love finally uncovers it, every missing piece falls exactly where it belongs." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances and the power of destiny.